Okay, good morning. It is way earlier than I think I normally stream. Not that I normally stream, but I had a little bit of time procrastinating the day job, and I'm working on the next tutorial. So I thought, hey, why not? Let's do a little streaming. I'll be on here for about an hour or so, and then I gotta get back to reality. So what I'm working on today, like I said, is the next tutorial. So I'll be a little bit of fumbling around, a little bit of this and that, back and forth. But what I'm working on is scriptable objects. There's a fair number of questions that come up with Bolt regarding data management. How do you manage data? How do you do this in Bolt? And by itself, Bolt isn't set up real well for that. The variables window doesn't scale well. To steal a line from someone else, that doesn't scale real well for data savings. So, for example, if you wanted to have a list of all, I think somebody on my community page suggested using like potions. If you wanted to have a list of potions for an RPG game, you could have each of those as an item or a variable in the variable window. And it would probably be an application variable because you'd want it accessible in all the different scenes. Now, that would work for the first 3 or 4 or 5 potions, but when you have 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 or 300, it's going to overwhelm the variable window down here, right? Like you can see, I just use a tiny portion of my screen over here behind my head for those variables, and so it doesn't work very well. So how do we manage this? Data is a question that comes up a lot. And I've been kind of thinking about this one, and this is certainly not the only way to do this. But one of the ways I think that works really well, or at least as a potential, is something like this, where we're using a scriptable object here. And right now, this scriptable object is, I was just messing around, seeing how this works with Bolt. And scriptable objects are assets, so they sit in your project, kind of like a prefab, and they just contain data. And they can be dropped into a slot on a mono behavior, so on a component. They can be dropped into a variable in a Bolt flow macro. So I think there's a lot of real potential there for making use of these things to manage our data. And in the video, I'll get into the final tutorial. I'll get into a little bit more detail of why you might want to use scriptable objects as opposed to just multiple prefabs. There's some good reasons that as soon as your game gets large or complex, becomes more apparent. So that's what we're working on here. And so what I think I'm going to do here, I'm looking for some way to kind of visualize these data differences. So I think what I'm going to do is have just kind of this terrain here, this plane. It'll have a nav mesh on it, and it'll have various agents on it that are just going to be probably just cubes. And some of the data I'm going to look at is, say, maybe the speed of those characters, so how fast they move around. Maybe the material. In this case, the material is just going to be their color. What do they look like? And then maybe their height too. Maybe I'll change their height. And so what we're going to have is one prefab and 2, 3, 4 different scriptable objects or instances of a scriptable object that contain the data, and we can just drop those onto the prefab. And the prefab, when the game starts, is going to say, hey, I go this fast, I'm this tall, and this is my material. And poof, there we go. So that's kind of the goal here. And this is going to use a decent amount of C#. Scriptable objects can, as far as I know, can only be created in C# and not using Bolt, but it's pretty user friendly. And then just because this is probably going to attract some folks without Bolt, I'll probably do kind of maybe a choose your own adventure. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do these videos. I'll have like one video for the scriptable objects, and then we'll kind of split into, hey, how do you do it with C#? How do you do it with Bolt? With similar outcomes. Let's see here. Mike, guys, you got a question? So if you wanted to control multiple things on an object, you'd use a scriptable object. Well, Yeah, if you want to contain data from multiple things, say like the RPG genre is kind of a pretty easy thing to imagine this in. So if you had kind of your traditional stats of strength and intelligence and stamina and agility and what have you, if you had all those things, you would just have all of those in one scriptable object. So let's get started here. I'm gonna start here with a new C# here, new script here, and this is gonna be the basis for our scriptable object. So I'm gonna call this agent stats, and we'll bring up Visual Studio. I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I'm gonna have I got this other scriptable object. There's a little bit of code here that I forget about the syntax or the commands needed. But let's take a look at this. So let's go full screen here. I'll zoom in a little bit so it's easier for you guys to see. What we're gonna do here, the first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna get rid of the start and the update because we don't need that. This is just a container holding the data. So it's also not going to be a mono behavior. So for those of you guys coming from a Bolt background, which tends to be my audience, a mono behavior, basically you can think of it as that makes it a component. That's something you can add to a object when you hit the add component button. But in this case, we're going to go a scriptable object. That's what we're going to inherit from. We're going to be of that type. And then here's the line I can never remember. What we need is this line right here. I'm just going to copy that over, and in the tutorial video I'll go through a little more detail here. But what this does is it now adds this to our context menu. So when you, in your hierarchy, when you push create, or if you right click in your project folder, you get a context menu that pops up, and that's what this is going to be. So this is going to be, we're going to give it a name, agent stats. That's the name of the file that it's going to create. And then this is the, I guess we don't even put a new on there. And we're going to call this agent stats as well. So the first one's kind of the file name. The second one's a menu name, kind of as expected. So you guys are following along. You can see here, once this compiles, I've got my agent stats here. Now it's not a scriptable object, but if I right click here and go to create, I've got agent stats here, and it creates this new scriptable object. You can see the new or the different icon, and then I can rename it whatever I want. Agent stats, just call it, let's not be creative at the moment. We're just gonna call it agent stats 1. And you can see over here in the inspector, there's nothing here for me to do because we haven't defined any properties, any parameters, any fields. Choose your term. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to create the fields, the data. So the first thing I'm going to do, just kind of maybe for fun, we're going to do public here. And so again, if you're coming from Bolt, this is our scope. We want to make it public so that we can see it in the inspector and that other scripts can access this data. If we forget the public or we leave it as private, the data will still be there, but we can't, it's harder to use and doesn't work real well for our use case. And then, so I want to be able to name this object. So I'm going to do string. So that's a type that Bolt it has and people should be familiar with. And then I'm going to do name. Now, if I do it like this, you'll notice I get a green line, and that's because the class already has a name. Now, if you're just doing this in C#, you can do just new, like that, that works. But I found this doesn't work in Bolt, so I'm gonna not do that. And I'm gonna put an underscore in front of it. Bolt just doesn't get happy if you don't have the underscore. It doesn't seem to work with the new. So that's gonna have the name of the character. I'm then gonna have a public float, and this is gonna be the speed. So this thing's gonna have a nav agent on it. We're gonna control the speed of it. And do a public float, which is gonna be the height. I'm just gonna have these things be able to be different heights. I'm gonna set this at 1, like so, just so that, basically this is just gonna adjust the vertical scale. So I wanna start at 1. And then the last thing we're gonna do, I'm gonna have a material, and we're just going to call this color. And so what this is going to allow me to do is drag and drop a material into this slot so that each of these different agents can have their own color and you can visually distinguish them. And now you could do a lot of different stats here. You could have whatever you wanted, right? There's lots of really good examples of how to use scriptable objects out there on the interwebs. You know, again, if you have the RPG stats, you could have your health, your intelligence, your agility, yada yada. If you had, say, a potion, you could have the color, you could have I don't know, the cost, the weight, you know, the effects of the potion would totally depend on how you are coding up your game. So that's it. That's really all I need to do here in C# with my scriptable object. So for the Bolt users, this is all you've got to create. And we can see these are grayed out, so I can even delete these and we can make the code even smaller. So if you're coming from a Bolt background, that's a pretty reasonable amount of code. In the tutorial, I'll probably link the file so you can copy and paste and such things. But things like string, float, and material, these are types that you're dealing with in Bolt anyways. One thing that's kind of new here is that you're typing instead of drag and dropping. Okay, so now that when that recompiles, takes a little bit to recompile. When it recompiles, you can now see those fields here in my agent stats. So if I name this guy Bert, let's give him a speed of 5. He's got a height of 1. And then let's make some materials. We're gonna make some really simple materials. There's material. Let's just call this red. Let's spell it properly. That always annoys me when I do that. Let's do I'll probably change these colors for the tutorial, figure out something that looks nice on the screen. We're gonna go all primary. So these are just standard materials. I'm gonna assign some hopefully non-offensive eye-piercing color to them. Something like that. Okay, so now that's a little intense. Okay, so now we've got something like that. It would be better to put these agent stats in another folder somewhere. But if I click here now, I can go in here and assign, let's make this guy blue. So he's blue. Now the power of this here is that's not all that special, right? That's not that different from a prefab. But if I go to create agent stats, I can do agent stats 2. And this guy I can call Hank, and he's gonna have a speed of 7 and a height of 1 point. Oh, let's make Hank tall, not 12. Let's make him 2. And Hank's gonna be red. And so what I now have is these 2 small, tiny little files in my project that are containing all the data about these guys. And I'm only gonna actually need 1 prefab to be moving around my scene. And that's what I wanna create next. I wanna create the prefab that's moving around the scene. And that's gonna be this cube here. So what I wanna do right now, I'm gonna code it up in C# because that's a little bit faster for me. And I'm just trying to get the flow of this. I just want to get code. I'm going to do 2 pieces of code. Let's do the easy one first. Let's do the one that drops this data in. So we're going to do another C# code here. We're going to call this a stats handler. This is just going to handle the stats. I'm going to open that up. Hopefully. Come on, Unity. Okay. So in here, I'm actually going to get rid of this stuff. I'm not going to use that. But here we're going to have a... I'm not going to make it a public field. I'm going to make it a private field. And what we're going to do is call it agent stats. So this is going to hold the stats like so. And by making it a serializable or serialized field and private, it just means I can access it in the inspector, but not it's not a public variable. It's not accessible from other scripts. So that's where I can drag and drop this stats into. So let's go back to Unity. And here's our cube. This is going to be our agent. And I'm just going to build this up piece by piece here. So this guy's going to have a nav agent on him. So that's what I'm going to add first, because I'm going to want to reference that here in a little bit. Okay, so there he's got a nav agent. And then I'm going to add my stats handler. And you can see there's my slot for my stats. So I'm going to drag in my stats like that. And so that's all it's going to really take for to assign the data to this object, is I'm just dragging that in. And then we'll make this object a prefab here in a minute. So now I'm going to go back into this code here, and I now want to do something with that data. So I'm going to do an on enable. And so again, if you're coming from Bolt, this on enable is the same event that Bolt has, the on enable event. And first I'm going to do is check if stats is not null. Just meaning like, hey, if I forgot to put that in there, then I don't want to do anything else. So if it's not null, what I'm going to do, we're going to make sure we're going to do this game object name equals stats name underscore, can't type this morning, like that. So we're going to rename the object. So Bert's going to be called Bert in the hierarchy. Hank's going to be called Hank in the hierarchy. Let me see, what else did I do in here? The speed. Okay, so then we're going to do this game object get component nav agent. Oh, I need to add in a library here. Unity by not UI AI. That way I can get my nav agent. That's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, it's not called it's called a Nav Mesh Agent. There you go. Okay, and we're going to set the speed to stats speed, like that. Then what's next? Height. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do this game object transform local scale plus equal. So we're going to add, well, we're gonna multiply, and we're gonna do a new vector 3, and we're gonna do 1 and stats height 1. My little f's in there, make myself happy. No, you don't like that at all. We're just gonna do like that. Okay, that's a better way to do it. So we're just gonna grab the transform the local scale. We're gonna set the x and the z. They're gonna leave it at 1, and the height and the y is gonna be this new height. And the last piece was the material, right? So if we have, so we're gonna do this game object get component mesh renderer material equals stats color. We're just gonna reset our material like so. And I guess this isn't the most sophisticated way to do it, right? Like I want to make sure that my speed's not set to 0. I would want to make sure that this material here, this color material is actually exists. I don't want to just set my material to nothing. But let's, and again, if you're coming from a Bolt background, this might look like gibberish, but this isn't actually all that hard to do in Bolt. This is going to be pretty easy and fairly easy to translate. Let's go back in here. All right, and let's do one more thing here. I think it's going to throw an error if I push play. I'm going to select my plane here. My ground is already marked static. I'm going to go into navigation, and I'm going to bake my nav mesh, just so that it doesn't complain that the nav agent is on a not on a nav mesh. So what should happen here is this cube in my hierarchy should be renamed Bert, It should have a speed of 5, which I think is already the default speed. Its height should be 1. Well, let's make it bigger. Let's make it like make him tall, and he should turn blue. Let's push play and find out what happens. There we go. Okay, so you can see here I've got Bert in the hierarchy. He's blue. The speed is 5, which again I think is the default speed anyways. He's much taller. I made him much taller than he needs to be just to make it easy to see. And he's turned himself blue. Now the cool thing here is if I drag and drop this other stats on here, Bert doesn't change immediately because that code only runs on enable. But if I toggle this code, the data gets used. And now that's the usefulness of, hopefully you can start to see the usefulness of scriptable objects, because now, right, that data is just, it's not in the prefab, it's in this scriptable object, is in this asset. And all I have to do is grab that data. And I can do the same thing. I just grab the other data set, drag it over here, and then again, toggle this so it runs on enable again, and we get a taller script. I think that's awesome. I think this is a great way to do it. And so what you would end up having is folders full of these scriptable objects of all these different agent stats. You would have folders that were full of scriptable objects for potions or different inventory objects, and it's just going to contain the data. And the other piece that's nice about this is the data is just contained in one space. It's not contained in each prefab. Not each prefab is not independent, which is just really nice. And there are ways to kind of hack this with prefabs, but it doesn't work super great. So let's go, I'm gonna keep working on my scripts here. So that was my stats handler. That's this piece here. The next piece I wanna do is kind of a random wander. Get this guy wandering around the screen just to give a little bit more interest in what's going on. We're not gonna do this super sophisticated. We're gonna do this pretty simple, pretty straightforward, or as simple and straightforward as we can. So what we're basically gonna do is pick a new spot on the nav mesh, you know, a little distance away, and walk to it. We'll see how much of these commands I can remember in C#. So here we go. We're gonna do a prefab and or a serialized private field. This is gonna be a float. This is gonna be the distance that we're gonna walk. We're gonna start with, we're gonna try going 2 meters. We'll probably need to make our plane bigger. We also wanna have access to, we're also gonna need our Nav Mesh Agent. So let's add that library in, do that. Nav Mesh Agent, and we're just gonna call this Nav Agent. Something like that, and that might be it. So here we go. Okay, so we want nav agent. We gotta get that. So we're gonna do this. Oops. This game object get component nav mesh agent. So we're just gonna grab that object or grab that reference to that component. And then let's think about how I want to. Well, let's do it this way. We can just do it with, so there's a couple ways to do a random wander. You can just wait a certain amount of time and have them choose a new location, and that tends to work pretty well. And that might be the better option in this case to be less sophisticated. You can also check the remaining distance to your target, which is a little bit nicer way to do it. In my opinion, that then becomes independent of the distance. The problem with that is then you got to check and make sure that the location's actually on the nav mesh. So let's look that up. That's the piece of code I always forget. If point on nav mesh. All right, so this is the one. This is the piece we want right here. We want the nav mesh sample. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if nav agent remaining distance is less than 1. Okay. Let's do it this way. Less than distance. No, let's not do it that way. That could be bad. We're just gonna do this. Okay. So if the remaining distance is less than 1, meaning we're pretty close to where we want to be, then we want to pick a new location. So we're gonna have a vector 3 new location, something like this, and we're gonna go. It's gonna be this game. There, do this. This transform position plus random on unit inside unit circle. I think we can get away with this one on unit sphere. Times distance. Okay. I think that'll work. I think we can get away with that. So basically this takes the position of the object and then adds this random value to it that's on a unit sphere, and then we multiply the distance so we roughly get the distance we want. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this code here. So nav mesh sample position. Let's just copy that. I don't have to keep flashing back and forth between the two. Something like that. And here, okay. And, okay, we need to define this hit. Nav mesh hit, like that. So if this is true, if this position's on it, then we're going to do nav agent set destination equals new location, something like that. If that didn't happen, we're going to do nav agent set destination hit position. So what this does basically is we sample we take this new position and we say, hey, is that on the nav mesh? We're gonna look 2 units away from that point to try to find something, and we're gonna look at all nav mesh areas. I only have 1 area, so it doesn't matter. And then this out variable here, this is where the data comes out. So what if the position we want to go to isn't on the nav mesh, this hit variable will contain the information about where we can go. And just to keep this tidy and short. Okay. I think that might be almost all we need. Now, the last thing to make this work, we need to get into this if statement on the first frame. And to do that, I'm going to do something like this. Set destination, this transform position. So basically that's going to do when it starts, the destination for the nav agent is going to be its current position, which should mean that the remaining distance is 0, and then we'll run this code and, we'll run and set the new destination, start wandering around. So fingers crossed. Let's see if that actually works that quickly. And again, if you're coming from a Bolt background, all of this, I'm going to translate this all into Bolt. Let's see, this will. There's Bert wandering around this scene. Okay, great. So let's play with this a little bit more. Let's slow Bert down. Bert's going to be a speed of 2. And we're going to come in here and I'm going to duplicate this guy, and I'm going to drop the other agent onto it, or the other data onto it. So we're going to have 2 of these guys. And this guy, let's not go that fast. Let's go like 4. We have a pretty small area here to work in. So there we go. We've got, they're a little chaotic, but we've got two agents going around. They're effectively, they're not a prefab yet, but they're basically coming from the same prefab. The data is getting loaded there. It looks a little silly at the moment, but there we go. So there's the power of the data of this. So what we can do is then I'm going to delete this for now. I'm going to go with my prefabs. I'm going to drag this in here. I'm going to rename it. Oops, not that. I'm going to rename this prefab agent, like so. And then I can just drag these things in here like. Actually, what I want to do is these agents should not have a stats on them. They should not have stats on them at all. And like that. And then in my scene, or some other way of doing this, you could have, let's say, this guy's going to have this data, and these three guys are going to have this data here. I push play. They grab their data and they become the agents that you want them to be. So again, the power of this is I have one prefab, just one prefab. So if I want to change something, I want to change this out so that it's a sphere instead of a cube, which I realize is silly, but maybe you need to add some other component to it. You need to add some other functionality to it. You're just changing one prefab. You don't have to change all the prefabs with all the different agents on it to add some functionality. You just have to change the one and it's grabbing the data. Which, again, I'm not an expert, but this is, in my mind, a step closer towards data-oriented programming, data-driven programming, where the code itself is fairly independent of the data, but it's grabbing the data and sticking it in there. I think is a really powerful way to do this. And if you're just messing around with Bolt or C# for the first time, trying to figure out how things work, this is definitely going to be overkill, and it's not going to be obvious of why this is useful. So let's go ahead and build this in. Let's start building this here in Bolt. So I can get rid of it. I got a flow macro here. I was testing some stuff out earlier. We can delete this. It's pretty useless. So the first thing I'm going to do is build that stats handler. Okay, so I'm going to do a stats handler. So I'm going to mimic, what I want to mimic is this code right here. And maybe this is my opportunity. I've been looking for an opportunity to create a video of how to translate C# into Bolt. Maybe this is that opportunity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this here, all this C# stuff, and turn it into a Bolt flow macro. Let's do that. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to have a, I'm just going to do a graph variable, and this is going to be stats, just like it was before. And I don't think I'm going to be able to see my type. It's there, but it's not happy about it. So let's add that type to Bolt. Go up here to Bolt, update, this is what I want. Okay. I don't need to add an assembly, but what I do need to do is come down here. You can see I've already got the potion there. It was from my messing around. Here I want to do agent stats. Add that in. This is going to take a little bit here to generate this. So what this is doing is, because this script is outside of the assemblies that Bolt usually looks at, it's looking at things like Unity Engine, Unity Engine.ai, and yada yada. It doesn't automatically fully recognize this variable type. So we need to load it in there, and that will give us access to the name, the color, the speed. You could see that the type was available there, which is interesting to me that Bolt recognizes it at that level, but it doesn't seem to have access to the public variables. And this is just something, every time you add a class, you need to do this. If you were to add more stats to the scriptable object, you would want to rebuild this as well to get access to those other stats or those other fields. It's a little time consuming, and so you don't want to be doing this all the time. You do want to figure out, get your scriptable object to have the fields that you need, and then go for it. There are also some downsides to these things that we can go over in a little bit, or I'll go over in the tutorial video. Okay, so with that, agent stats. So we've now got that. And we're gonna actually assign the value here at some point. This is where we're gonna drag and drop the data just like we did on C#. But what we wanna do is, again, we're mimicking this code here. So far we've got this part here. We've added in the agent stats. And now we gotta do the on enable. So that's pretty straightforward. We're gonna add an on enable event like that. And then what's our first line here? We're going to look at our stats name. Okay, so we're gonna search for, let's see, game object name. Oops. I can't type this morning. And we want to set the name of the game object. I'm gonna connect that up like so. It is the self object. Okay, so this self here, just again for those following along from Bolt, that self is that same thing as, the same thing as this right here. So this .game object is the exact same thing as self. Now we need to tell it what to name itself. So I'm going to drag this in here like that. And I'm going to drag this out. And we're going to go look for agent stats. And are these all grade? Oh, I know. Agent name, that's actually not what I want. Let's do it this way. I'm looking forward to, there we go. Okay, so here's my underscore, and you can see these are not grayed out. I'm gonna get that one there, and we're just gonna connect it like that. You notice if you're coming from Bolt, I could also drag and drop my scriptable object into there, but I don't want to do it that way. I want it to be this variable that gets set in the inspector per prefab. Okay, so there we go. Now we're setting the game object. So we've done the first line, and now we're gonna set the nav agent speed. So let's do that. Nav agent speed. We're gonna set that value. And here, then we're gonna go get that stat. So scroll down, speed, get, and I'm gonna keep dragging out like that unless it gets too crazy. Okay, so that's our second line. We've now set the nav agent speed. Now we want to do the local scale. This will take a little bit more to create this vector. It is the one downside, I think, one of the main downsides to visual programming is stats like this can be a little trickier. So or not stats like that, vectors in math. So let's do transform scale. So we're gonna do local scale set. Okay, like that. We're gonna do a new vector 3, like this, and connect the values like so. X and Z are gonna be 1. And then we want to go get our agent stats, height, get. That. So again, you can, hopefully this is starting to make sense of why we want to use these scriptable objects. All that data is in there, and it's pretty easy to get access to in Bolt or C#. It's just easy. Make this a little more compact here. And then our last one is this mesh renderer. So we're gonna get the mesh renderer and then set the material. So let's look for mesh renderer, mesh renderer. let's add a little more to our search here. So there's a lot of properties here. Material, set material. There we go. And here we go, agent stats. No, what do we call this? Color. Get connected like that, and I hate doing it like that, but we're gonna have a line going through our like that. There we go. So that's our stats handler. So that is what this flow graph should have, the identical operation of this code here. So 22 lines of code, more or less reproduced in a dozen blocks. Not too bad. Okay, so let's go here. Let's go to our prefab here, and I'm gonna duplicate this prefab, and I'm gonna call this bolt agent. Spelling agent right now. I'm spelling. Who knows? Okay. So the only reason I'm doing that is so that this prefab can, we're just going to mimic the behavior. So I'm going to actually remove the random wander, the stats handler from that prefab and drag in the stats handler flow macro like so. And then down here in the object variable, I'm going to go here and I'm going to, agent stats like that, and let me lock that so I don't, well, I guess I don't really need to lock that. We're gonna come down here to scripts, and I'm gonna drag in the data from that. Notice all my units get a little bit happier now. Let's get rid of these guys since these are C# agents. Let's drag that bolt agent onto platform, and let's see if this works. So the random wander is still C# based. So there we go. Okay, so our stats handler is now working in Bolt. And here with Bolt, again, one of the nice pieces is we can see all the values that are getting passed between our units, and it's all working as expected. And again, since this is working on enable, I can drag in my other data point here. I can turn this flow machine on and off, and poof, there we go. It grabbed the new data and loaded it onto our prefab. Okay, so last piece, and I'm doing this mostly because I like to have all my tutorials worked out ahead of time. I'm gonna recreate now this random wander behavior in Bolt, just so I have it. It makes it easier for when I record the video to know what's going on, so I don't fumble around quite so much. A little less of the ums and ums and I know when I watch a tutorial video, I get tired of the wobble or the fumbles here and there. Would prefer a tidier video. So yeah, my guess isn't this it's pretty sweet, right? Like, this works really well. And I think this, again, I keep beating the dead horse, so to speak. I think that my folders here could use a little bit better organization, but if you've ever built a large game with a lot of units, managing all that is difficult. Managing all the prefabs is difficult. The other thing that's cool, and I wanted to look at this, is let's look at the file size here. So this agent right now, this prefab is 5 kilobytes. If I go to my data package, that data is actually, it says 1 kilobyte, but it's actually only 486 bytes. So rather than having duplicating all these prefabs and potentially bloating your project size, which Okay, if you're making a game for PC, that's not necessarily a big issue. But it does mean that the bigger your project gets, the longer it takes for Unity to get started, the longer it takes for Unity to compile something. And so we're helping to keep that nice and small. If you're building, if you're trying to do something with mobile and you really do want the file size to be small, you want the amount of data that the computer has to churn through to be small to keep the battery life good, this is a great way to do that. Not only is this a better way to program, it keeps your code cleaner. It decouples, so to speak, but it has some other benefits to you as the developer as well. That might be a little bit more tangible, especially if you're just getting going with this. So let's do this here. Let's make this random wander. So we're gonna need these variables here. We're gonna need to start. So let's get our new flow macro here. Flow macro random wander. And what do we say here? We needed a we're going to need a distance, and that's going to be of type float. We're going to call that 2 for now, and we're going to need a nav agent, and that's going to be of type nav mesh agent right there. Actually, we may not even need that with Bolt. We may not need that. I don't think we actually do. We don't need that with Bolt. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add in that start, and let's look at what we're doing in our start. So we're getting access, or we're getting a reference to that Nav Mesh agent. I don't really need to do that with Bolt. It's one of my questions with Bolt. I'm not going to go off on a tangent on that, but I do have a question. So I don't think we need to do that. Bolt will do that for us. We're going to get the set destination. So we're going to Nav agent set destination. I don't know if anybody else has that problem where the units in Bolt, the text gets a little messed up. I don't know if that's because I have a 4K screen. I don't know what that's about. And then what we're going to do is get a transform position. We're just going to get that. We want the position of ourselves, and like that. Okay. Then we're going to have an update. And what we're doing here is we're checking the remaining distance. So we're going to have a branch. We're going to translate this line into a branch. And this is this will be a place where you might see if you're in the Bolt camp or the C# camp, you can start to see some of the difference in terms of the volume or how fast it is. Right, this one line of code is going to end up turning into multiple blocks in Bolt. So we're going to look at a branch. And this is why some people don't like visual scripting, because it bloats on the screen. And it's true, it does bloat, but that's just the nature of visual scripting versus text. So what we're going to look at is the nav agent remaining distance. Okay? And we're going to then take this and say if this is less than or equal to our distance over here. Right? So it's not that bad. My 4 units, the one line of code, the if statement turned into 4 units. Not horrible. You can, that's why some people don't love it. So if that's true, then we're going to do this thing here. So let's create this new location. So if that's true, we're going to create a new vector 3. That's not the one we want. New vector 3. This is one of those things with Bolt that I'm a little. I wish I had a. I just want to copy a vector, and that's a piece I'm not. All right, we're gonna do it the hard way. So we're gonna do something like that, and then we want the position of transform position. We want to, oh, nope. We want to get the position, and we are then going to I want to. I really just want to I want to get the values of it. I wish I could split it. I wish there was a thing that you could just put in the vector and then get all three of the. That's okay. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it the way I know how to do it. I'll try to we're gonna do it the way I know how to do it because I know how to do it that way. And I'll hopefully do a little bit of research and see if there's a faster way to do this. Wait, no, there is. I know how to do this better. Okay. Okay, we're gonna do it this way. And then we're going to do, I'm just being stupid. Random inside sphere. Or actually on unit sphere. Okay. We're going to take these two things here. We're going to add them together. We're going to add these two vectors together. Like so. And then that was a total brain fart. If you were sitting there watching me going, what the hell is he doing? That was the correct response. Okay, so now we've got the new random position, and we need to set nav agent. Actually, that's not true. Okay, so now we've got this piece here. Now we need to do this piece here. We need to sample this position. Okay, I'm gonna go full screen here because we're getting a little large. Nav agent sample position. Okay, something like this. So if that's true, we're gonna sample the position. It's not what I want. What am I want, yeah, sample position is what I want. Nav mesh sample position. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Nav mesh position. That's what I'm looking for. I was trying to figure out why there wasn't an input for the vector 3. So that's what I want to do. Max distance, we'll just call that 2. And I think the area mask, I think if I leave it at 0, it'll do all areas. Okay. So that is that line. And then we're going to take this into a branch. Name like that. And then we're going to, if that's true, if it is on the, I have to make this a little bit fancier. Okay, Navmesh Set Destination. Interesting. I don't know what that unit does. So if it's true, we're gonna do that. And I can't do this. In Bolt, I can't do that. Because if I do that, it's gonna recalculate this random position all over again. And that's gonna cause problems. So I actually have to do more along the lines of what I was doing in C#. We have to cache that position like that. And what that's doing is the same thing as this piece right here. So those two words, if you will, actually what that's doing is caching this value. It's storing it in memory. And that's what this unit here is doing as well, so that later on I can access it like that. Then I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to cross paths like that. Otherwise, we're going to take this hit. Let's see. Nav Mesh hit. Are you not? Let's see if you can. That is not an included type. So let's add that to Bolt real quick. I don't know why that's. I don't know why that is. We're gonna make sure that's in there. Nav Mesh hit. Just make sure. So we're gonna let that generate again. That's gonna take a minute. While we're waiting here, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to throw it into the chat. Hopefully that's all working. I'm trying a little bit of different technique here with the chat. Happy to answer questions as to what I'm doing. Almost finished up here. Probably work on this for another couple minutes here. Hopefully this code will work. And that'll give me the basis for... This might give me the basis for next 2 or 3 videos. I'm trying to figure out how I want to do that. I think there's one video while I'll be doing just the scriptable objects, talking about how to create those, the usefulness of it. I'll demonstrate what I've created here so that people can see the usefulness. And then it'd be kind of a choose your own adventure maybe, where I will create the stats handler in C# and Bolt separately. We'll see how long that takes to do, but okay. Here we go. And with that added, we should be able to come up here, get Nav Mesh hit, and hit, position, get. And then we can connect it like that. Okay. Check our code. So we've done, that looks like that's working. So let's go to our prefab here, our Bolt agent. I'm going to remove the random wander. I'm going to, don't need this. I'm going to add another flow machine. And I'm going to drop in this random wander. Like that. Make sure that's updated here. Okay, that updated. Let's see if this works. This guy should wander around. And we clearly have an issue here. Okay. Okay. So what it is saying there is, and it's orange, which sometimes is an issue. What it's saying down here in my warnings is that this cannot be dynamically fetched dynamically. It's got to be assigned, which is a fancy way of saying, hey, you need to connect me like that. I need to be part of the flow. You've got to tell me, you got to actively tell me to run this piece of code. Okay, I think that'll clear things up. Cache unit is not something I've used a lot. I've used it in a video a couple weeks ago. One of the first times I really used it. And okay, we're not. Okay, so there you go. I changed the nav mask. So let's go in and now he's wandering around jittering like an idiot. Okay. Let's nav mesh area. Let's see if that works. We'll just click up like that. Let's see if that'll. I was messing around with Bolt 2 the other day, and there we go. Now we're behaving well. Let's up that distance a little bit. Change that. Oh, you know what we didn't do? Okay. Missed one piece here. So this random, I forgot to multiply this. By the distance. So that's why it was jittering so much. I'm gonna up my distance a little bit too. It was jittering so much because it was really just moving around inside of a unit sphere. And again, there's more sophisticated ways of doing the random sphere, but for my purposes, I think that works pretty well. If I up that distance, I should get rid of some of that jitter. There we go. Now if I make it like 10, it's gonna wander around a little more properly. Unfortunately, there's a unit circle, but it does it in 2 dimensions. I didn't want to deal with that, so we're doing this. And then likewise, let's just prove the point here. If I duplicate my my agent, I can then drag in my other stats that simply, and I should have a red and a blue cube, parallelepiped, whatever you want to call it, running around the. Uh-oh. And they both turn to Hank. Let's. It's interesting. Ooh. Oh. Interesting. I wonder if that's because it's a graph variable, so it's specific to the graph, so it's making a prefab. Let's try making an object. We're gonna go down here to, let's go back to our thing. Let's do it here. We'll do stats. This is gonna be a type of agent stats. Wait, why didn't you? Why aren't you letting me assign the variable type? Well, that's weird. What if I give it some other? It'll take anything but agent stats. Oh, is it doing? Weird. It's doing it up here correctly, not down here. Like a little bit of a bug. Okay, so we don't want to assign that up there. So let's go back here and look at this guy. We've got rid of our graph variable, which means, so we got to switch this to an object variable. Okay, and so it's giving me an orange warning because that's not assigned in, it's not assigned up here. Let me just see if we're getting some weird. All right, now it's gonna play nice. So that's still not the prefab, is it? Okay, the prefab. Weird. Huh. Okay, so now As an object variable, we can assign it per object. Okay, so I learned something today. So there we go. Now we've got the two things. So we can't use it as a graph variable because that is tied too closely to the graph. The scope's not big enough. And there we go. We've got our jittering spheres, our cubes on the screen. Okay, so just recap, rehash for my own sake here a little bit. We've got a really simple scriptable object containing some data. That's these agent stats here. We've got our name, we've got our speed, we've got our height, color, and we've got a stats handler both in C# and FlowGraph, or C# and Bolt, that can grab that data and apply it to the object. And just for visuals and fun and to make use of those data a little bit, also got a random wander, so we wander around the screen. I think that'll do it. That's what it's gonna take to make these videos. That's the background I need. I'll make it pretty, choose some better colors, get some post-processing in there for some better lighting and what have you. But that's gonna be the basis of probably 3 videos. So anyways, I think that's all I got time for today. Thank you guys so much for joining. If you guys got questions, come find me on my Discord channel, or other various places. But I got to run at this point, so thanks for joining, and stay tuned for upcoming tutorial videos.